Allow me to take you all on a little nostalgia trip. Well, I suppose if you clicked on the video, you already saw the title and you know what this is about, but please, play along with me. This is the best way to start the video I could think of. So go ahead and close your eyes, and imagine that it's 2010 again. If you're in the same kind of demographic as me, then you probably should have been between 10 and 14 years old. It's Friday evening, and you just got home from school, so of course you're on straight to your family's Dell home computer. You start the 5-minute boot up, giving you just enough time to get a nice cup of milk and have your mom throw in some Tostino's brand pizza rolls.
Hey Mom, when are we gonna watch the video?
Well, you got the pillows?
Got the pillow.
With snack in hand and greasy fingers all over the keyboard, you double-click on Internet Explorer and head over to congregate.com. Or maybe Armored Games if you're a loser. Or Newgrounds if you became a future 4chan poster. After finding out that your mouse wasn't working because the rolling ball was full of crumbs, you eventually start looking for something to waste your weekend on. Something catches your eye. You click it, and a few minutes go by as the web page loads up. Then the title screen comes too, and the music starts up. Instantly, your small little underdeveloped brain knows that you're in for a ride. This isn't just going to be another fun time waster like Bloons Tower Defense, Fancy Pants Adventure, or QWOP. No. Just from the theme alone, you're harkened back to the first time you launched one of the epic adventures of old. Chrono Trigger. Golden Sun. Final Fantasy 8 or 9. So you launch the game and play it. It isn't quite what you expected, it only took you about 20 minutes to beat. But it was funny. Instead of your greasy fingers skipping all the dialogue as usual, you found yourself reading it and giggling. So you go ahead and click onto the second game, and what's this? The game carries over your save data? Flash games can do that? And there's a third game? Well, turns out the first game was just a test run by the developer, and you really are in for a wild ride. While the first chapter was short, the second one can take up to 6 hours. And the third one? The third one can take up to 40. For those of you who don't know, we're talking about the hit turn-based RPG flash game Mardek. Originally it was planned to be an 8-part series, but the creator burned themselves out after spending 2 years working on the third, so it never received a sequel. And in case you missed that, let me say it again. The creator, Tobias Cornwall, aka Psuedolonewolf, made 46 hours of content at the age of 19 and put it on the internet completely free of charge for anybody to play. And when I say he made the game, I mean he made everything. He did the art, coding, and created all 78 tracks in the game from scratch. Now, while we're on the subject of the creator, it'd be lazy for me to not go over their story since the release of Mardek 3, because it's not only an interesting topic, but also they're still creating 10 years later, and they deserve the same praise and critiques as any other artist. So, shortly after the release of Mardek 3, Tobias discovered that he had a brain tumor, and obviously this brought about a number of issues, financially, physically, and mentally. Even though I hate the term because of how romanticized it's become in the past few years by influencers talking about changing themselves, I think it's apt to say that following his surgery, Tobias underwent a sort of ego death. He thought long and hard about what he wanted from life, and you can see from some of his more recent blog posts that the conclusion he came to was to send a message of positivity. In his post, he laments on how he created works featuring so much death, and he now aims to work on things that relay how he feels. With him so clearly describing how he feels about his creative process, I find it hard to fault the guy for deciding not to continue the series, especially with how much stress and anxiety he claims it caused him. But it seems like I'm in the minority here. When looking through his blog post, you can quickly notice a trend. If you Control F and look up the word Mardek in a post, even if it's just him referencing it for a quick second, you'll find that about half the comments are people talking about how they can't wait for him to continue the series, or telling him that it's their favorite game and they want nothing more than for him to continue it. Honestly, I get the feeling the guy is haunted by this game. It's the legacy he can't shake. No matter how many times he says he's not interested in continuing it, the waves of people show up to tell him that the game he doesn't want to work on anymore is the only game they've played or are interested in. I had reached out to him in hopes of getting an interview to ask him this question, and I'm really not surprised or disappointed that he didn't respond, when I mentioned the video was on Mardek, but I get the feeling he wishes he could separate himself as an artist from the game, so that he could truly work on new things without any bias from his community. And before you go and comment, yes, I do see the gross irony of making a review of Mardek despite thinking that's how he feels. Anyways, that's enough talk about Tobias. For now, let's get on to reviewing the actual game. And I know I referenced some posts on his blog, and I'm really sorry to say I won't be able to source the exact ones I'm referencing. This man makes long posts at least monthly, has been doing so for around 10 years, and a lot of my knowledge comes from following his work on and off over those years. But I'll link his blog, Alora Fane, in the description. Like I said, he still works on new games, and even though he's got a large portfolio of unfinished games, I can't say I hold that against him. As somebody who considers himself a creative person, the only difference between us is that he makes his projects public so we know when they're abandoned. So, let's talk about oh, wait, we can't talk about the game yet, because Mardek is a Flash game, and we're living in the year of our Lord, 2021, not 2010, and Flash doesn't exist anymore. So instead of talking about the game, we instead have to talk about how to play the game first. There is a Steam version that Tobias put out when Flash went down, but it's $10 and I'm not made of money. I was just looking to re-experience a Flash game from my childhood. So I looked into it a bit, and it turns out there's some browser plugins that get certain Flash games working again. But after trying a number of sketchy looking downloads, I couldn't get any of them to work with Mardek specifically. Thankfully, Newgrounds actually has their own method to get Flash games working again, and it works fantastic. It has no problem playing Mardek. But it turns out that Tobias never uploaded the third game onto Newgrounds, after initially having trouble with the file size being too large. So yeah, I shelled out the $10 for the game. Which, to be honest, the creator completely deserved it. I'm just a cheapo. It would have been nice if it was cheaper when I bought it on the autumn sale, but looking at Steam at the time of me writing the script, it turns out he did put it on sale for the summer sale, so fuck me, I guess. The game does have two separate copies, the second one being a little bit more expensive but gives you the OST and some extra notes from the dev on where the series would have gone. But interestingly enough, with my copy of the base version, there's still a folder here clearly labeled music with the whole soundtrack in nicely named MP3 files. Anyways, now that we finally own the game, it's time to play it. What the fuck is this shit? Well, it turns out that despite having a Steam release, Tobias didn't bother to implement any way for the game window to fit to your screen resolution. I tried a couple of basic things, like looking to see if anybody said anything about it on his blog or Steam reviews, and looking through the games folder for anything that seemed like an obvious way to fix it, but I'm no Mandalore Gaming, so I didn't mess with any game files. I just suffered and played it in this nasty looking box. I did end up finding a fix after finishing the game though, but I didn't test it long enough to learn if it's stable, so use at your own risk. If you download Newgrounds as Flash Player, you can use it to run the application in the Steam folder, and it runs full screen perfectly fine. Okay, now that this ancient relic is finally playable, let's start by going over the first thing you're going to notice, outside of the menu that we've already talked about. The graphics. And I'd say they're pretty solid. When walking around the world, the game has a certain retro style it's clearly trying to go for, and does a good job of staying true to the style. Some of the areas in the third game, I'd even go so far as to say they look good. In combat, they ditch the pixel graphics, and the background and artwork in these segments is really nothing special, but I feel like there's a certain amateur charm to them. Even though some of the monsters look like whack Fakeamon, I still feel like a certain amount of care and attention was put into every drawing. As for the UI, I honestly think it was designed really well for such an early era indie game. In combat, the UI is aesthetically pleasing, it does a good job of conveying important information, and you're even able to click on monsters or characters to see specifics. If I had to get nitpicky, I'd say that my only issue here is I wish that there was a way to see all the buffs and debuffs on an enemy. Because once you get into some of the wacky antics of the third chapter, you have to wait for the little symbols to cycle through and see what all is affecting you. Yeah, out of combat, the UI is nothing special. Pretty standard RPG stuff. But what I will say is, watch the map. The map knows all. Actually, this is a little bit of a con for me, so I shouldn't leave it vague. There's a bunch of hidden items and passages in this game, which I think is super dope. The only issue is that the map shows you where these things are, so I found myself opening the map every few steps when I was somewhere new so that I didn't miss anything. Outside of those two small things, the only real issue I can say about the graphics is that some of the head cut-ins during dialogue look kinda silly, and I think some of the faces were lazily reused, like the one between the princess that Mardek fantasizes about at the start of the game and his mom. Wait a minute. Gameplay should be the longest segment, which makes me want to save it for last. So let's talk about sound next. Yeah, it's pretty bad. A bunch of stock sounds, and there doesn't seem to be any layering effects, so your ears get assaulted by noise whenever you use AoE skills. Honestly, it's about what you should expect from a Flash game from 2010. On the flip side of that, we have the music. I've already hinted at it a bit, but I think the music in this game is a real gem. This is something else I wanted to ask the developer, but if I had to guess, they had some kind of musical background before making the game. Probably a class on music theory or something like that, because some of these are real pops. My favorites are Secret Boss, and Clav, or Clave? Clav? Now, of course, that's not to say they're all hits. There's some misses in there, too. I'm looking at you, Lifewood and Dreamwood. But for the most part, you can expect your ears to be happy for the 50-ish hour journey. And like I said, there's 78 items in this music folder, so if you don't like the music in one zone, you can expect to be onto something else soon enough. Next, let's talk about one of my favorite parts of the game, the writing. This game is hilarious. Even though it establishes a conflict in the story, it never takes itself too seriously, and there are jokes written in just about every dialogue, be it story related or random NPCs you can talk to. My favorite is early into the second chapter, when you're clearing out a cave of bandits. You confront one of them, and he says something along the lines of, "You guards have no chance against me, because I'm actually 4 blokes!" And then it cuts to the battle versus 4 bandits. I'm sure retelling it makes it lose its charm, but it's just all the small things like that scattered throughout the game that kept me smiling the whole way through. Now, even though I praise the writing of the game, I praise it because it's lighthearted and silly. Do not go in expecting well-written characters. A lot of the more serious writing is pretty cringy, and it reads like what it is, an amateurly written story and dialogue. But sadly, the cringy dialogue isn't the only issue in this segment, and honestly I debated for a while on if I wanted to actually touch on this or not, but there's some really I'll just come out and say it. A lot of the writing came across as being pretty sexist to me. All the female characters you encounter are written either as coy and shy and only exist for the male characters to talk about romancing, or are written as being crazy, you know, the classic hysteric woman stereotype. And if it was just female characters being written like this, I could probably write it off as a awkward teenage boy writing women, but what really sets me off for this is this book you can read in the magic shop in the first town that talks about the different elements that people have and how romance almost always blossoms in a particular way, with the male being an element that is strong against the females because women want to be dominated and men want to dominate. The developer tries to backtrack on this with another book in the third game that basically says the previous book is total hoopla, but we see from the romances that blossom in the game how the developer actually feels. We'll go over these characters a bit later, but try to follow along with for now. Of the 3 relationships we see happen in the game, we have Dugan and Emila, Dugan being earth and Emila being water, with earth being strong against water. Then we have Donovan and Charla, Donovan fire, Charla air, with fire being strong against air. And the last relationship goes a bit against the grain, being Moriador and Gloria. Moriador being fire and Gloria being earth, these two being across from each other and not interacting. We do have one more relationship between our main characters, Mardek and Elwyn? What the fuck? Sure, whatever. We have this last relationship between these two, but Mardek is a light, a moral element, and Elwyn is water. The book states that the moral elements are free to be with whoever they want, so I don't feel like it proves a point either way. Leaving that one out, it's like 2 out of 3 relationships hinting at the sexist book being right. Now, I haven't played any of Psuedolonewolf's more recent games, so I can't say if this was just like a, edgy teen phase he was having, but man, 2010 was a whole different era. Some real pre-Gamergate shit. Oh, actually, I almost forgot. There is one more reoccurring female character who doesn't fit into either of the 2 molds I laid out previously, and it's this chick, who talks like this. Let's move on to gameplay. We're finally here, everybody. We finally made it to the gameplay in this game review. The base gameplay itself is pretty simple. If you played any other turn-based RPG, then you get the idea. Random encounters, turn-based combat, getting stronger by leveling up, getting loot and finding treasure. There are some interesting design choices, however. Instead of adding AoE spells like most games, you can instead choose to pay twice the mana of certain spells to cast them on all enemies or allies. But outside of combat is where things start to stand out a bit from games of the same genre. Instead of learning skills by leveling up, you instead have an entire system based around skills being learned from gear. You equip a piece of gear, and if it gives an active skill, like a fire spell for example, you now have access to that spell while the gear is equipped. And if you use a spell X number of times, you'll master it, and have it no matter what you have equipped. There's also passive skills tied to gear, such as 20% more damage with physical attacks. For these, you have to allocate the skill as being active, using a resource you get based on your level. Then in combat, when you do a physical attack, you get this neat little QTE, and if you succeed, you get the bonus damage. Succeed X times, and you master it just like with normal skills. It's pretty cool on paper, but I actually have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this system. I think it's a really cool concept, and because of its nature, it causes you to do a lot of inventory management to make sure everybody gets as many passives as they can, which I actually really enjoy despite it sounding boring. The part I hate about it is that certain skills are super situational, like removing poison for instance. But you need to hurry up and master the ability to remove poison, even if nobody gets poisoned, because it's only a matter of time until you get better gear. Or maybe you already have other gear you need to put on in that slot to master it. It leads to a lot of times where you're wasting your turn spamming a skill just to master it instead of actually playing the game. So this next point is going to sound like such a small little detail, and it may come off as kind of weird that I'm dedicating an entire talking point to it, but to be honest, this is my favorite feature of the game. I don't know if this is an original idea or if another game did this before Mardek, but I think every game of the genre needs to adopt this system. Check this shit out. See that shit? If you're a high enough level, you can press a button to skip random encounters. This sort of ties in with one of my cons later in the segment, but this feature holds hands with that point so well that it really accentuates just how nice it is to have. This game Pavloved my ass to mash my cancel button the second I hear. Now about that con that I just mentioned. Whoa mama, does this game have a lot of needless backtracking. It's shameless, and so clearly just a way to fluff out the game. Oh, you just beat a boss and got teleported out of the dungeon for a cutscene? 100% chance there's really good loot for you if you walk all the way through the dungeon again. And sometimes there's an entire optional dungeon back there too. Especially in the third game that's absolutely filled to the brim with some really cool optional content, I found myself just walking around in previously explored areas to find random MacGuffins. Speaking of optional content, these games have a ton of it. In the second chapter, there's only a bit. A hidden dungeon that you find for backtracking back to where you killed the boss that has its own super boss of the game. Then you find all 4 of the hidden trilobite keys, and you can go to a special 20-round combat arena. The third game, however, has so much optional content. In fact, there's, I think, 8 characters total, and almost all of their strongest weapons are from a different piece of optional content. Things like finding relics in hidden treasure chests, or making enough money to buy back kidnapped fairies from bandits. On top of that, the third chapter has not 1, but 2 hidden dungeons, each with their own incredibly difficult super boss, as well as the arena from the last game, but this time there's a 20-wave arena, as well as 10-wave solo arenas for each character. Sadly, not all that glimmers is gold, and Tobias decided to do some very questionable design around some of this optional content, leading me to my least favorite part of the game. Those 4 trilobite keys I mentioned? as well as 4 chalices that lead to both the super bosses from the 3rd chapter. Both are missable content, and you may not even know that you missed your chance to get them until you're 30 hours in. And in the guide that came with the game, Tobias even had the gall to write, "Better luck next time." Bruh, if I play for 30 hours and I miss some cool content, there will not be a next time. And I think with that rage comment out of the way, that about sums up my experience with the gameplay. It's good. Nothing incredibly stand out compared to big name turn-based RPGs, some cool mechanics and some stupid ones. Let's talk about the story and the characters of the chapter. We won't talk about personality or anything because the characters are all pretty one-dimensional, but we'll talk about how they play, because their combat mechanics have more character than they do. In case you didn't get it already, spoilers ahead, obviously. We can pretty well skim over the first chapter. There isn't much to talk about here other than it sets up Mardek and Dugan being best friends, and tells us they want to be royal guards or knights or something when they grow up. Oh, also Mardek gets possessed by some alien who landed here running from his people because they've been turned evil or something. On to chapter 2. Tally-ho, and forsooth, and unguard, or something. Chapter 2 opens with some very Star Wars-esque scrolling text that catches us up on what the heroes have been up to since we left them. Turns out the game starts on the day of their final test to become official guards. And the test is to go slaughter some bandits who are causing a ruckus in the gem mines nearby. My kind of test. We go there, and we let the bandits get away and instead kill a guard. But turns out that's good enough, since we're now officially guards. Hooray! The 2 best friends are told that their first mission as official guards is to check out a nearby village for some sus stuff, and are joined by their romantic interest Emila. The 3 go to the village and we learn the main conflict of the game. Zombies! Well, actually the conflict is that one of those aliens that were turned evil chased our good guy alien here, and he's a necromancer who's trying to cause trouble to lure us out, and killed the good guy alien. So we find out where this bad guy alien is hiding and we kill him. Mission complete! I know it sounds like I'm leaving out a lot of details, but it's a Flash game, guys. What do you expect from the story here? Oh, actually, right, I guess I should mention that Dugan dies at the end. Apparently we didn't have enough time to fight an enemy while fleeing from a self-destructing spaceship, so we distracted it while we ran. Even though I had 8.5 minutes left. Also, when you get back, Emila tells you that she's leaving the guard because she's got better things to do with her life. While the first game had a little bit of combat, it was literally just us hitting stuff with a stick. This chapter starts to have some real combat, so I can start going over characters. We have a cast of 3 mandatory characters and 2 optional ones. You can choose which you want to slot in. The first character is the main one. Well, sorta, I guess. Mardek. He's okay. He can heal, remove status effects, and he's got okay damage. He's your healer. We also have his friend, Dugan. He actually does pretty good damage, and he has a skill that can break physical mitigation barriers that opponents put up. That's the end of his use. Overall, he's less useful than Mardek since he doesn't provide as much support for the real carry of the game. The last mandatory character is Emila. She's your standard mage. She's the best in the game for insta-killing a bunch of weak enemies, and she gets a single spell of each element, giving her a nice variety. Nothing else to say. Now, onto the first optional character, Zach, a mercenary you can hire. He has some neat mechanics around raging and doing more damage each consecutive time you use the same skill, but I didn't use him. The other optional character is just too good. And finally, the moment we've all waited for. The one I've hyped up for so long. And that's Vern. He's a paladin, and for anybody who's touched a tabletop RPG, that should tell you all you need to know about why he's so damn good in a game where you fight a bunch of undead. Honestly, this isn't even Mardek Chapter 2, this is Vern's Holy Inquisition, with help from these guards. This guy is hyped up on gamer fuel, and he's out for the blood of the undead. Now that we've got Chapter 2 wrapped up in a nice little bow, let's move on to the biggin, Chapter 3. Before we dive in, let me preface by saying that Chapter 3 makes an effort to set up a lot of things for future chapters, so there's a number of story beats that are left as loose ends, because obviously the next chapter never came. I'm just gonna skip over mentioning those to keep things a little bit briefer. Just like last chapter, we get this nice little pre-chapter synopsis that tells us that after chapter 2, Mardek got promoted to a royal guard. He's been adventuring all over like a true hero. The game starts with him heading over to the Temple of Light in order to investigate some monsters, and to babysit these other two wastes of binary code. We travel through the temple, murder and spread disease through a tribe of indigenous lizard people, and then find our way into the Temple of Darkness, which the Temple of Light is built on top of because of some yin and yang type of shit. In there we encounter the first piece of shit chalice. So make sure you grind up 100 enemies in here before fighting the boss, or else you're going to have better luck next time. Anyways, my rage aside, we do what we needed to do here and return to the king of our hometown, who, as everybody points out, is talking strangely and has weird glowing eyes like he's possessed. The king tells us to go collect the elemental crystals for him because they're omega powerful and he wants them. Our alien buddy tells us that the king is, again, obviously possessed, but it would be unwise to attack a king on suspicion alone, so we should collect the crystals like he asked, but instead hold out on them for ourselves. So, just like that, we set out on our multi-continent journey to the 4 elemental crystals where we solve puzzles, fight cool bosses, and collect the MacGuffins. Except there's actually only 3 dungeons. I think my homie Tobias got bored on working on them after the 3rd and just made the 4th one a single room, with no encounters instead of a city. And you don't even collect the crystal either. You go there at the end and there's some guards telling the king is tired of waiting. So with the 3 crystals in hand, you go back to the king with the guards and boom, final boss. Game's done. Despite how I've been talking about the story so far, the end of the 3rd game actually has a decently done twist and some neat character development. I'm not going to talk about it though, I've got to leave some nuggets to incentivize you to go play it yourself. Alright, now buckle in. We've got a lot of characters to talk about, and they all actually have some pretty fun mechanics, and they're all very well fleshed out gameplay-wise. So get ready to hear my lukewarm opinions on them. Okay, firstly, let's go over Mardek again. He gets a huge glow-up in this chapter, along with a fantastic new design. Mwah, chef's kiss. Firstly, there's a new group of skills called Block, which can be cast on your entire party and blocks a single attack of a specific element. Our homie Mardek gets Moral Block, the only block that works on not just one element, but on both light and dark. On top of this added defensive skill, he also gets a physical skill for each of the 4 natural elements, which makes him a versatile powerhouse as well as a healer. He's a hard carry Giga Chat compared to the virgin healer he was last chapter. And then, immediately coming off the high of Mardek, there's Sharla and Donovan. You get both of them at the very start of the chapter, and they're similar enough that I'd rather just group them up together in one section. They have decent physical and decent magic capabilities. They're pretty squishy, and they come at level 10 when my Mardek was already 15. I'm really not a fan of these two if you couldn't tell. Their magic skills are strong, but they only get spells of one element, fire for Donovan and air for Sharla, and their physical attacks aren't strong enough to make up for that lack of diversity they provide. Sharla at least gets a heal, but I dropped them both as soon as I could, and how squishy they are made their solo arenas pretty tough. The next party member you get is Slank. He's a lizard. He's great. He hits stuff good. He gets a fire and earth skill, which is enough coverage for me when he's smack hard. I like him. After that is Solar. Just like the other two that you start with, Solar only gets light spells, and just has decent physical skills. And they're even squishier than Donovan and Sharla, but they get some skills that help them circumvent that. Overall, their spells are super strong, and light tends to have less enemies resisted than the natural elements do, so I found Solar way more usable. But the way they talk gives me some prehistoric oh whoa speak vibes, so I got turned off from using them longer than I had to. After getting Solar and finishing the Dark Temple, the game opens up and lets you recruit a variety of different people in whatever order you find them, so these next few won't be in any particular order. Let's go ahead and start with our 2 returning characters from last chapter, Vern and Zach. In this one, they're largely the same. Sadly, this chapter doesn't have a bunch of undead, so Vern isn't insanely OP, but he does still hit hard. Zach gets a couple of interesting things in this game, like a skill that gets stronger for every enemy he's killed. He's also one of the only 2 characters able to get a 50% evasion skill. They're both pretty good as physical damage picks, but I found them a bit boring compared to the more unique characters introduced this chapter. And then there's the inventor, Moriador. He doesn't master new skills like normal characters. Instead, you have to use monster drops to make his inventions, of which he can have 2 equipped at a time. These inventions do a variety of things like heal the party with a potion sprayer, put enemies to sleep, or burn them all down with a flamethrower. He's got a cool gimmick, but I didn't like being restricted to only having 2 skills at a time. Also, his solo arena was tough. He isn't super strong and he's fairly squishy. Next we have Eluween. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about character personalities, but this chick is a total psychopath. I mean, she tells Mardek about how she dreams about him every night, and how she's happy Dugan is dead because now he won't get between the 2 of them. She's messed up. When it comes to combat though, she's jamming out. She's great. She brings a whole bunch of unique effects. And finally, the last character you can get in this big collectathon is Gloria. She's the shaman who took the place of the shaman we killed last game. She's really good. She gets an AoE heal, she gets null for every natural element. She has a spell of each element just like Emila did last game, except it has the added effect of reducing the enemy's stats. She's awesome. I mean, just look at this spell list compared to Emila's. And the last character you can get, after doing an obnoxious amount of backtracking to each of the elemental temples and back in order to get various components, is Moriador's greatest invention, the Metal Man, Legion. This guy is dope. He can learn a bajillion different skills from enemies. Just like Moriador, you have to make equipment for him, his weapons and armor. Once you've got the highest tier of the equipment, Legion has really good physical attack, he's insanely tanky, and he has the best versatility in the game with some of the strongest skills. And you know, I think that just about wraps up everything I want to say about this game. A fantastic Flash game from my childhood that still stands out in my memory. I have a ton of respect for the work and skill of the developer for creating this game from the ground up, and I urge anybody who's interested to follow his vlog. Now, this is a review and not just me gushing about the game, so how about we give it a final score? It's a fun game. It's got hours and hours of content, good music, but it is weighed down so hard by just a handful of really poor, unfun design choices. Overall, I'm going to have to give it a solid 6.5 out of 10. I'd say if you have the cash lying around, it's worth the $10 price point on Steam. And if you're patient, then the time and enjoyment you get out of it is definitely worth the $7 when it's on sale. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed their stay. This was my first time putting together and editing a video, so if you got any opinions, please give me some constructive criticism either in my DMs or in the comments. If you enjoyed it, hit the thumbs up, and maybe catch one of my live streams over at twitch.tv/uarita. Although it has been a hot minute since I've streamed, I've been a little bit preoccupied with other things. Okay, bye.